Between 1862 and 1865, 14 children vanished from Sacred Heart Orphanage in Pennsylvania. They weren't adopted or relocated. They simply disappeared from every record as though they had never lived. Local Protestant households suddenly appeared with Irish Catholic children laboring on their properties, children who carried the telltale marks of institutional upbringing and spoke with pronounced brogues. When these families were questioned, their explanations never matched. Recently uncovered correspondence between the Mother Superior and Philadelphia's bishop exposes the shocking reality. These children weren't lost, they were purchased. Before we delve deeper into Sacred Heart Orphanage's tale, this channel isn't meant for everyone, only those courageous enough to face America's most disturbing historical chapters. If you're prepared to discover secrets that influential institutions attempt to bury permanently, click that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. I'm curious to know. Comment below and tell me which state you're watching from. Do you have the courage to learn what truly befell those 14 innocent lives? Let's uncover this together. The story behind Sacred Heart's vanished children starts not with their vanishing, but with the dire circumstances that led them to Pennsylvania's undulating countryside initially. In 1862, Lancaster County was a mosaic of wealth and bigotry. The rich soil yielded plentiful wheat and corn that nourished Union troops battling in the Civil War, enriching Protestant, German, and English landowners beyond their forebears' wildest dreams. Yet prosperity created complications. With numerous young men marching to war, farms urgently required laborers during essential planting and harvesting periods. The worker shortage was reaching critical levels just as government contracts offered unprecedented profits to those capable of fulfilling demand. Into this environment of opportunity and despair arrived Sacred Heart Orphanage, founded in 1859 by Philadelphia's Sisters of Mercy. The 3-story brick structure occupied 40 acres of donated property just beyond the small community of Strasburg. Its Gothic Revival design stood like a Catholic stronghold among the plain Protestant meeting houses and Lutheran sanctuaries scattered throughout the region. The structure's pointed archways and cross-crowned bell tower made it impossible to overlook, which was precisely the intention that disturbed many local inhabitants. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, a keen-eyed 45-year-old woman, had come from County Cork 2 decades earlier carrying nothing but fierce resolve and unwavering faith. She retained her homeland's melodic accent, yet her commercial acumen was thoroughly American. Under her guidance, Sacred Heart had expanded from sheltering 12 children to housing nearly 60 by 1862. The institution accepted Irish Catholic children from Philadelphia's overcrowded slums, along with offspring of Irish immigrants who had perished. Constructing the Pennsylvania Railroad through dangerous western mountain passages, the children's ages spanned from 5 to 16, their faces showing institutional life's characteristic pallor and the hollow-eyed exhaustion of those who had learned early that life offered no promises. They dressed in matching gray wool uniforms, simple dresses for girls, plain trousers and shirts for boys, and participated in daily mass within the orphanage's modest chapel. The older children assisted with cooking, cleaning, and tending the extensive vegetable plots that helped nourish the institution. Sister Agnes Flanagan, the orphanage's treasurer and Mother O'Malley's closest ally, maintained meticulous records of every cent entering or leaving Sacred Heart's accounts. Her ledgers, written in careful Irish script, chronicled the perpetual battle to maintain the institution's financial stability. The Philadelphia Catholic Diocese supplied some funding, but affluent Catholic benefactors were scarce in Pennsylvania, and the ongoing conflict had complicated charitable contributions. By 1862, Sacred Heart was running a substantial deficit, a reality that kept Mother O'Malley wakeful during lengthy winter evenings. The surrounding Protestant community regarded the orphanage with mistrust that approached hostility. The Know-Nothing movement had stirred anti-Catholic feelings across Pennsylvania during the 1850s, and the Civil War had done little to calm these tensions. Protestant clergy regularly warned about the dangers of papal influence in their communities, while local publications printed letters objecting to the orphanage's foreign children and their loyalty to Rome. Some farmers refused all business with Sacred Heart, while others imposed excessive prices for grain and supplies. It was into this climate of religious animosity and financial strain that Father Michael Brennan came in spring 1862. The diocese had assigned him to serve as Sacred Heart's chaplain and assist Mother O'Malley in managing the increasingly challenging financial circumstances. Father Brennan was a different kind of priest, ambitious, charismatic, and possessing a businessman's instinct for opportunity. Unlike the elderly Irish priest who had previously served the orphanage, Brennan was Philadelphia-born and grasped the delicate equilibrium between Catholic principles and American pragmatism. At 38, Father Brennan presented an impressive figure. In his black cassock, his dark hair consistently perfectly groomed and his shoes buffed to military brilliance, he spoke without an accent, having studied at Philadelphia's St. Charles Seminary, and possessed the unusual talent for making both Catholics and Protestants comfortable in his company. Local Protestant ministers found him remarkably reasonable and prosperous. German farmers discovered he understood their concerns regarding labor shortages and wartime production requirements. What none of them understood was that Father Brennan's comprehension extended deeper than simple sympathy. He perceived opportunity where others saw only obstacles, and he started developing a solution that would benefit all parties involved except possibly Sacred Heart Orphanage's children. The initial indication that changes were occurring came in late May 1862, when Mother O'Malley announced to staff that several older children would be placed with local families to assist with spring planting. This wasn't inherently unusual. Orphanages had long arranged for older children to work as farmhands or domestic help. However, Sister Agnes observed that Father Brennan was making these arrangements personally rather than through the standard placement procedures. When she requested to examine the paperwork, Father Brennan assured her he was managing all documentation himself to avoid overburdening the diocese's overworked administrators. The morning of June 15, 1862 arrived, gray and humid, with storm clouds gathering over the Susquehanna Valley. Timothy Walsh, a red-haired 14-year-old who had resided at Sacred Heart for 3 years, was helping Sister Margaret tend the vegetable garden when Father Brennan approached with a well-dressed Protestant gentleman he introduced as Mr. Ezra Hoffman, a successful wheat farmer from Lancaster Township. Timothy had been anticipating this moment for weeks. Father Brennan had spoken privately with him about the possibility of working for a good Protestant family who would treat him justly and pay wages that would help support the orphanage. The boy was eager to contribute. He had observed Mother O'Malley's concerned expressions during meals and overheard whispered conversations about outstanding bills and diminishing supplies. If working for a Protestant farmer could help Sacred Heart survive, Timothy was prepared to make that sacrifice. Mr. Hoffman examined Timothy with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating livestock. He inspected the boy's hands for calluses, asked him to lift a grain bag to test his strength, and questioned him about his experience with horses and farm equipment. Satisfied with his observations, Hoffman nodded to Father Brennan and counted out $45 in gold coins, an enormous sum representing more than most workers earned in 3 months. "The boy will work through harvest season," Hoffman declared, his Pennsylvania Dutch accent thick with authority. "He'll live in the barn loft with my other hands, and I'll send him back in November when the work is finished." Father Brennan blessed Timothy and assured him he was performing a great service for both his faith and his country. The Protestant farmer needed workers to produce grain for Union soldiers, and Timothy's labor would help feed brave men fighting to preserve the Union. Sister Agnes watched from the kitchen window as Timothy climbed into Hoffman's wagon with his few possessions bundled in a cloth sack. Something about the transaction disturbed her, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. Perhaps it was the speed with which everything had been arranged, or the fact that Hoffman had paid in gold rather than the paper currency most people used during wartime. But Father Brennan seemed confident in the arrangement, and Mother O'Malley had approved it. So Sister Agnes suppressed her concerns and returned to her ledgers. 3 days later, 16-year-old Margaret Connolly vanished under similar circumstances. She was taken by Mrs. Sarah Zimmerman, the wife of a prosperous German farmer, supposedly to work as a household servant and help care for the Zimmermans' infant twins. Margaret was an intelligent girl with a gift for languages. She had learned Pennsylvania Dutch from German immigrants in Philadelphia and could read Latin well enough to assist at Mass. Mrs. Zimmerman paid $60 for Margaret's services, explaining that she needed help urgently because her regular servant had fled to Philadelphia to work in a munitions factory. The pattern persisted throughout summer 1862. Every 2 or 3 weeks, Father Brennan would arrive at Sacred Heart with another prospective employer, always Protestant, always wealthy, always in desperate need of immediate assistance. The amounts paid increased as harvest season approached, and labor became even scarcer. 13-year-old Patrick Murphy went to work for a merchant family in Lancaster for $50. 15-year-old Bridget O'Brien was placed with a banker's family in Columbia for $75. 12-year-old Sean McMahon, despite his youth, was taken by a mill owner who claimed he needed a boy to help with his horses. By September 1862, 8 children had been placed with Protestant families, and Sacred Heart's financial situation had improved dramatically. The orphanage could pay off its debts, purchase new winter clothing for remaining children, and even add a small addition to the building to accommodate more orphans from Philadelphia. Mother O'Malley praised Father Brennan's success in finding good homes for older children, and the Sisters of Mercy began relaxing their concerns about the institution's future. But Sister Agnes continued feeling uneasy about the arrangements. She had noticed that none of the placed children had written letters back to the orphanage, which was unusual. Children placed in previous years had always maintained contact with their friends and the sisters who had cared for them. More troubling still, when she tried visiting Timothy at the Hoffman farm, she was turned away at the gate and told the boy was too busy with harvest work to receive visitors. The breaking point came on a cold October morning when Sister Agnes encountered Mrs. Hoffman at the Lancaster market. The woman was purchasing supplies for her household, and Sister Agnes approached her to ask about Timothy's welfare. Mrs. Hoffman looked confused and claimed she had no idea what Sister Agnes was discussing. She insisted her husband had never employed any orphans from Sacred Heart and that their farm workers were all local men, exempted from military service due to their essential agricultural work. When Sister Agnes pressed the issue, Mrs. Hoffman became agitated and suggested the sister was mistaken about which farm Timothy had been sent to. But Sister Agnes was certain she had watched Timothy leave in Ezra Hoffman's wagon, and she had Father Brennan's word that the boy was working at the Hoffman farm. The contradiction made no sense unless someone was lying. That evening, Sister Agnes confronted Father Brennan in his small office behind the chapel. She demanded to know the truth about Timothy and the other children, and she insisted on seeing the written agreements documenting their placements. Father Brennan was initially dismissive, suggesting Sister Agnes was confused and had misunderstood Mrs. Hoffman's comments, but when the sister threatened to write directly to Philadelphia's bishop, Father Brennan's demeanor changed entirely. His friendly smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare that seemed to look right through her. "Sister Agnes," he said quietly, "you must understand that these are complicated times. The war has created opportunities that good Catholics must be willing to seize for the greater good of our faith and our institution. Those children are safe and well cared for, and their sacrifice is ensuring Sacred Heart can continue serving God's purposes." "What sacrifice?" Sister Agnes demanded. "What have you done with those children?" Father Brennan leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, considering his words carefully. "I have found them homes where they can contribute to the war effort while learning valuable skills from Protestant families who appreciate their labor. In return, these families have made generous donations to Sacred Heart that have secured our future. It's an arrangement benefiting everyone involved." But Mrs. Hoffman said what she needed to say to protect her family's privacy. Father Brennan interrupted. "The families who have taken our children value their discretion, and we must respect that. Some arrangements are best kept confidential, especially during wartime." Sister Agnes felt a chill that had nothing to do with October weather. "Father, are you telling me that you have sold those children?" The word hung in the air between them like a curse. Father Brennan's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an unmistakable threat. "I'm telling you, sister, that you have a choice to make. You can continue serving God faithfully at Sacred Heart, focusing on your duties and trusting in your superior's wisdom, or you can pursue questions that will bring nothing but trouble to this institution and everyone in it. The bishop sent me here to solve Sacred Heart's problems, and I have done exactly that. I suggest you remember where your loyalties lie." The winter of 1862 to 1863 passed in an atmosphere of uneasy silence at Sacred Heart Orphanage. Sister Agnes continued her duties as treasurer, but joy had gone out of her work. She found herself studying the ledgers with new eyes, noticing patterns that had previously escaped her attention. The donations that had appeared so providentially during summer all came from the same source, a vague entry labeled placement services, that corresponded exactly with dates when children had been taken from the orphanage. She began understanding that what she had witnessed was not charitable placement, but something far more sinister. The children hadn't been adopted or even indentured in the traditional sense. They had been sold to Protestant families who needed workers but didn't want to pay full wages to adult laborers. The transactions were disguised as charitable arrangements, but the substantial payments made it clear Sacred Heart was running what amounted to a human trafficking operation under religious charities cover. The realization tormented Sister Agnes through long winter nights. She had taken vows of obedience to her religious superiors, but she had also taken vows to protect the innocent children in her care. The 8 children who had disappeared the previous summer had been her responsibility, and she had failed them. Utterly, their trust had been betrayed not by strangers or enemies, but by the very institution that had promised them safety and care. Mother O'Malley seemed genuinely unaware of Father Brennan's arrangement's true nature. She spoke proudly of the orphanage's improved financial situation and praised the priest's success in finding good homes for older children. When Sister Agnes tried raising concerns about the lack of correspondence from placed children, Mother O'Malley dismissed her worries with the explanation that Protestant families often discourage their workers from maintaining ties to Catholic institutions. Those children are beginning new lives, Mother O'Malley said firmly. We must trust that God has guided them to where they need to be, and we must focus on caring for the children who remain with us. But Father Brennan was already planning to expand his operation. As spring approached, he began conducting what he called evaluations of the orphanage's children, assessing their physical condition, work skills, and temperament. He paid particular attention to children who had recently arrived from Philadelphia, newcomers who had few friends at the orphanage and whose disappearance would be less likely to cause disruption. Among remaining children, the priest had also begun cultivating relationships with a broader network of Protestant families throughout Lancaster County and neighboring counties. The success of his initial placements had created demand for more workers, and the approaching planting season promised to bring even higher prices for healthy, trainable children. Father Brennan spoke of expanding operations to include children from other Catholic institutions in Pennsylvania, creating what he called a regional placement service that would benefit multiple orphanages. While meeting Protestant farming communities, labor needs. Sister Agnes realized she was witnessing the birth of a systematic trade in human beings, one that exploited both Catholic institutions' desperation and Protestant employers' prejudices. The Catholic orphanages needed money to survive, and Protestant families needed workers who could be obtained more cheaply than adult laborers. Father Brennan had found a way to profit from both needs while maintaining a veneer of religious respectability. The psychological impact on remaining children was subtle but unmistakable. They had noticed that older children who left for placements never returned or wrote letters, unlike children placed in previous years. Whispered conversations in dormitories revealed growing anxiety about their own futures. The children began seeing reaching their teenage years not as a milestone toward independence, but as a sign they might be next to disappear. 10-year-old Mary Catherine Donovan, who had been particularly close to Margaret Connolly, began having nightmares about being taken away by strangers. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, crying for Margaret and begging the sisters not to let Protestant men take her away. When Sister Agnes tried to comfort her, Mary Catherine clung to her desperately and whispered, "They're not coming back, are they? Margaret and Timothy and the others. They're never coming back." The question haunted Sister Agnes because she increasingly suspected Mary Catherine was right. The children who had been taken weren't being trained for independence or given opportunities for better lives. They were being consumed by a system that valued their labor more than their humanity. Once they entered that system, they effectively ceased to exist as individuals with rights and futures of their own. As snow melted and spring's first signs appeared in the orphanage gardens, Sister Agnes made a decision that would ultimately expose the full horror of Father Brennan's operation. She began keeping a secret record of every child placed, documenting their names, ages, physical descriptions, and the families who had supposedly taken them. She also began discreetly questioning recent arrivals from Philadelphia about any siblings or friends who might have been at other Catholic institutions in the region. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears and revealed that Sacred Heart's missing children were part of a much larger exploitation network stretching across Pennsylvania and possibly beyond. In March 1863, as the Civil War entered its bloodiest phase, Father Brennan received an unexpected visitor who would ultimately unravel his carefully constructed network. Bishop Francis Kendrick of Philadelphia arrived unannounced at Sacred Heart, ostensibly to conduct a routine inspection of the diocese's rural institutions. But Sister Agnes quickly realized the bishop's visit was anything but routine. Bishop Kendrick was a stern, intellectual man who had risen through church hierarchy by combining theological scholarship with administrative precision. He had been receiving troubling reports from other Catholic institutions across Pennsylvania, reports of children disappearing from orphanages and schools without proper documentation, and of suspicious financial windfalls coinciding with these disappearances. The pattern had finally become too obvious to ignore, and the bishop had come to Sacred Heart to investigate personally. Father Brennan received the bishop with elaborate courtesy, conducting a tour of the orphanage's improved facilities and praising the Sisters of Mercy for their dedication to children's welfare. He presented financial records with pride, explaining how his innovative placement program had transformed Sacred Heart from a struggling institution into a model of efficiency and sustainability. The bishop listened without comment, his pale eyes taking in every detail of the orphanage's operations. But when Bishop Kendrick asked to see documentation for children who had been placed with local families, Father Brennan's confident demeanor began to crack. He explained that records were stored in a secure location in Lancaster and couldn't be retrieved immediately. He promised to have them available within a few days, but the bishop insisted on seeing them before his departure the following morning. But evening, as Father Brennan worked frantically in his office to create required documentation, Sister Agnes made a decision requiring tremendous courage. She approached Bishop Kendrick privately and requested a confidential meeting. The bishop, who had served in Pennsylvania long enough to recognize institutional corruption signs, agreed to hear what she had to say. In the orphanage's small library, with only a single oil lamp for illumination, Sister Agnes revealed everything she had discovered about Father Brennan's operation. She presented her secret records of missing children and described her encounter with Mrs. Hoffman at Lancaster Market. She explained her growing suspicions about the true nature of placement services and her fears for the welfare of children who had been taken from Sacred Heart. Bishop Kendrick listened in grim silence as Sister Agnes detailed what amounted to a systematic slave trade operating under Catholic Charities cover. When she finished her account, the bishop sat quietly for several minutes, weighing the implications of what he had heard. Finally he spoke in a voice carrying absolute authority's weight. Sister Agnes, what you have told me represents one of the gravest scandals in our diocese's history. If your suspicions are correct, Father Brennan has not only violated his sacred vows but has committed crimes against both church and civil law. I want you to understand that pursuing this matter will likely result in Sacred Heart's closure and significant damage to the church's reputation in Pennsylvania. Are you prepared for those consequences? Sister Agnes met the bishop's gaze without flinching. Your Excellency, I took vows to serve God and protect the innocent. Those 14 children trusted us to keep them safe, and we failed them. If Sacred Heart must close to prevent this from happening to other children, then that is God's will. The bishop nodded slowly. Very well. Tomorrow morning I will confront Father Brennan with your allegations. I want you present as a witness, and I want you to bring every document you have compiled. We will get to the truth of this matter regardless of the cost. But Father Brennan had not risen to his position without developing a keen sense of self-preservation. He had noticed the private meeting between Sister Agnes and Bishop Kendrick, and he correctly interpreted the sister's refusal to meet his eyes during evening prayers. That night, as the orphanage slept, Father Brennan gathered his most important documents and what money he could carry, and he disappeared into the Pennsylvania countryside. By morning, Father Brennan was gone, along with nearly $300 from Sacred Heart's treasury and all records of his placement operations. He had left behind only a brief note claiming he had been called to serve as a military chaplain and would be departing immediately for the front lines. The note made no mention of missing children or families who had supposedly taken them in. Bishop Kendrick was furious at the priest's escape, but also relieved to have confirmation that Sister Agnes' allegations were true. Father Brennan's flight was as good as a confession, and it freed the bishop to take immediate action to uncover the conspiracy's full extent. He dispatched investigators to locate missing children and began determining which other institutions might have been involved in similar operations. What they discovered over the following weeks was a corruption network that had exploited dozens of children across multiple counties. Father Brennan had been working with at least 3 other priests and had established relationships with Protestant families throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. The operation had generated thousands of dollars in illegal profits while condemning vulnerable children to lives of unpaid labor and social isolation. But the investigation also revealed something even more disturbing. Several children who had been placed could not be located at all. Some families who had purchased them had moved to other states, taking the children with them and leaving no forwarding addresses. Others claimed children had run away or died from illness but could provide no documentation to support their claims. The trail of at least 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, had gone completely cold. The discovery that several children remained missing transformed Bishop Kendrick's investigation from an internal church matter into a criminal case that would ultimately involve both state and federal authorities. The bishop realized some missing children might have been transported across state lines, which would make their disappearance a federal crime under laws governing interstate commerce and kidnapping. In April 1863, as the investigation expanded, Sister Agnes received an unexpected visitor who would provide the first real breakthrough in locating missing children. Jacob Stoltzfus, a young Mennonite farmer from Lancaster County, arrived at Sacred Heart in obvious distress. He had heard rumors about the investigation and had come forward with information he claimed would help locate at least some missing children. Stoltzfus explained that his family had been approached by Father Brennan the previous summer about taking in a Catholic orphan to help with farm work. The Mennonites, as a peace church, had maintained neutrality during the Civil War, but had also experienced severe labor shortages as their young men left Pennsylvania to avoid being drafted into military service. Stoltzfus's father had been tempted by Father Brennan's offer but had ultimately declined because the arrangement seemed to conflict with Mennonite principles about treating workers fairly. However, Stoltzfus knew of other Mennonite families who had accepted children from Father Brennan, and he had growing concerns about how those children were being treated. The Mennonite community was tight-knit and largely self-governing, but rumors had begun circulating about families who were working their orphan children like slaves and preventing them from maintaining any contact with the outside world. "There is a family in our district," Stoltzfus told Sister Agnes and Bishop Kendrick, "the Yoders, who took 2 children from your priest last summer, a boy and a girl, Irish children with red hair. The boy would be about 14, the girl maybe 12. They work from dawn to dusk in the Yoder fields, and they live in a shed behind the barn. My wife has seen them at the creek when she goes to fetch water, and she says they look like they are afraid of their own shadows." Bishop Kendrick immediately dispatched 2 investigators to locate the Yoder farm and verify Stoltzfus's claims. What they found confirmed the worst fears about missing children's fate. The Yoder family had indeed purchased 2 Irish children from Father Brennan, Sean McMahon and his younger sister Ellen, who had been taken from Sacred Heart on the same day despite being only 11 years old. The children were living in conditions that barely qualified as human. They slept on straw in an unheated shed, worked 16-hour days without pay, and had been forbidden to speak to anyone outside the Yoder family. They had been told Sacred Heart had been destroyed in a fire and that all the sisters had died, leaving them with no one to turn to for help. The Yoders had also threatened to turn them over to Union Army recruiters if they tried to run away, claiming Irish Catholic children were considered enemy sympathizers and would be imprisoned or shot. The discovery of Sean and Ellen provided the first concrete evidence that placed children were being held in slavery conditions, but it also raised terrifying questions about other missing children. If the Yoders were willing to treat children so brutally, what might have happened to children sold to families with even fewer scruples or community oversight? The investigation took on new urgency when Bishop Kendrick received a letter from Baltimore's Catholic diocese reporting similar disappearances from Maryland orphanages. The letter described a network of priests and religious officials who were selling children to Protestant families throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, with some children being transported as far south as Virginia and North Carolina. The operation appeared much larger than anyone had initially suspected, and Father Brennan had been just one participant in a regional conspiracy. As federal marshals joined the investigation, they began uncovering evidence of a sophisticated criminal network that had been operating for at least 2 years. The conspirators had developed a system for identifying vulnerable children, creating false documentation, and moving them across state lines to families willing to pay premium prices for workers who could be controlled completely. The network had generated tens of thousands of dollars in profits while condemning hundreds of children to lives of forced labor. But the most disturbing discovery came when investigators located a farm in Chester County, where 3 former Sacred Heart children had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. The farmer claimed the children had died from a fever during the harsh winter of 1862 to 1863, but the local coroner's examination revealed evidence of severe malnutrition and physical abuse. The children had been buried in unmarked graves behind the farm's barn, their deaths unreported to any civil or religious authorities. The farmer, a prosperous grain merchant named Samuel Crawford, initially denied any knowledge of how the children had died, but when confronted with the coroner's evidence and threatened with murder charges, He broke down and confessed to investigators. He admitted purchasing the 3 children from Father Brennan for $200, intending to use them as unpaid farm workers until they reached adulthood. But the children had been weak from their institutional upbringing and had struggled to adapt to farm labor's harsh conditions. Crawford claimed he had tried to care for the children when they became ill, but he had been unwilling to summon a doctor because he feared questions would be asked about their presence on his farm. By the time he realized how serious their condition had become, it was too late to save them. Rather than report their deaths and face difficult questions about how he had acquired them, Crawford had buried the children secretly and destroyed all evidence of their existence. The discovery of 3 dead children sent shockwaves through the investigation and transformed public perception of the case. What had initially been viewed as a corrupt but relatively minor scandal had become a story of systematic child abuse and murder. Newspapers throughout Pennsylvania began calling for immediate arrest of everyone involved in the network, and political pressure mounted for a comprehensive federal investigation. Just when we thought we'd seen the full extent of this horror, the investigation took an even darker turn. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happened when federal authorities finally tracked down Father Brennan and uncovered the true scope of his network. Federal marshals located Father Michael Brennan in October 1863 at a Union Army camp near Gettysburg, where he had been serving as a chaplain under an assumed name. The priest had grown a beard and claimed to be Father Patrick Murphy from Boston's diocese, but his distinctive Pennsylvania accent and his knowledge of Latin liturgy eventually betrayed his true identity. When confronted with evidence of his crimes, Brennan initially maintained his innocence and claimed he had been providing a valuable service to both the Catholic Church and Protestant families in need of workers. But the weight of evidence against him was overwhelming. Federal investigators had documented at least 47 children who had been sold through his network across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. They had traced financial records showing Brennan and his collaborators had generated over $15,000 in profits from their trafficking operations, an enormous sum representing more than most Americans earned in a decade. Under intense interrogation, Father Brennan finally confessed to his operations. Full scope. He revealed that the network had been his own creation, born from his observation that Protestant families were willing to pay substantial sums for workers who could be controlled completely. He had convinced other priests to participate by arguing that profits would help their struggling institutions survive wartime's economic pressures. The children, Brennan explained with chilling matter-of-factness, were selected based on their age, physical condition, and social isolation. Older children who could perform heavy labor commanded the highest prices, while younger children were sold to families who needed domestic servants or help with lighter agricultural work. Children who had no relatives or friends outside the institutions were preferred because their disappearance was less likely to be noticed or investigated. These children had no future anyway, Brennan told his interrogators with stunning callousness. They would have spent their lives in poverty, probably dying young from disease or industrial accidents. At least this way they served a useful purpose and contributed to the survival of Catholic institutions that could help other children. The priest's confession revealed locations where some missing children had been taken, leading to the rescue of 11 more former Sacred Heart orphans, who were found working on farms across 3 states. But 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, remained unaccounted for. Some had been sold to families who had subsequently moved west, taking children with them to territories where federal authorities had limited jurisdiction. Others had been sold to families who claimed children had died or run away, but could provide no credible evidence to support their claims. The investigation also uncovered evidence that several children had been sold to families who had no intention of treating them as workers or servants. 3 children had been sold to a wealthy Philadelphia merchant who kept them as personal servants in his mansion, forcing them to work without pay while forbidding any contact with the outside world. 2 others had been sold to a Virginia plantation owner who used them as laborers alongside his enslaved African Americans, creating a grotesque situation where Irish Catholic children were held in conditions identical to chattel slavery. Disturbing of all was the discovery that some children had been sold to families for purposes that went beyond mere labor exploitation. Federal investigators found evidence that at least 3 children had been sold to buyers who were specifically seeking young servants for what documents euphemistically described as personal service. The investigators' reports, which were sealed by court order and remained classified for over a century, suggested that some missing children had been sold into sexual slavery. The full horror of Father Brennan's network became clear when investigators realized the priest had been operating what amounted to a catalog system for child trafficking. He had maintained detailed records of available children, including their ages, physical descriptions, work skills, and temperaments. Prospective buyers could review these records and select specific children who met their particular needs, with prices varying based on the child's age, health, and capabilities. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, when confronted with evidence of what had been happening under her authority, suffered what witnesses described as a complete nervous collapse. She had genuinely believed Father Brennan was helping to place children in good homes, and the revelation that she had been an unwitting accomplice to child trafficking destroyed her mentally and spiritually. She was removed from her position, and spent the remainder of her life in a convent infirmary, never again able to speak coherently about her time at Sacred Heart. Sister Agnes, despite her efforts to expose the conspiracy, was consumed by guilt over her failure to act sooner. She had suspected something was wrong from the beginning, but her obedience to religious authority had prevented her from taking decisive action until it was too late to save most of the children. She left Sacred Heart shortly after the investigation, concluded, and spent the rest of her life working with freed slaves in the South, seeking what redemption she could find through service to other victims of human trafficking. The trial of Father Brennan and his collaborators became one of the Civil War era's most sensational criminal cases. The federal prosecutor charged them under newly passed laws against interstate trafficking in human beings, arguing their crimes were comparable to the slave trade the Union was fighting to abolish. The defense attempted to portray the defendants as misguided religious officials who had been trying to help children find better lives, but the evidence of systematic exploitation and abuse was too overwhelming to ignore. During the trial, testimony from rescued children revealed the full extent of trauma they had endured. Sean McMahon, the boy found at the Yoder farm, testified that he had been forced to work 18-hour days during harvest season and had been beaten with a leather strap whenever he showed signs of exhaustion. Ellen McMahon described sleeping in an unheated shed during winter, sometimes waking to find ice on the blanket covering her. Other children testified about being forbidden to speak their native language, being denied medical care when they became ill, and being threatened with violence if they tried to contact their former caretakers. The testimony that had the greatest impact on the jury came from 12-year-old Bridget O'Sullivan, who had been sold to a family in Baltimore County, Maryland. Bridget described being forced to work as a domestic servant from dawn until midnight, sleeping on the kitchen floor, and being given only